You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage Podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage Podcast. This is episode number 146, and today we are joined by Joe Miles. Joe, thanks for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Man, guys, thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here hanging out with y'all tonight. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk some hunting, talk some Asio Gear. We'll talk about all of it. But for people that maybe have been living under a rock or just don't look at any hunting content on YouTube or listen to any podcasts, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe who you are and then how you kind of cut your teeth on hunting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Joe Miles out of Columbia, South Carolina. I live on the street I grew up on, if you can believe that. My wife and I moved away for about 7 years and then found a house on the street I grew up in and moved back here. And Columbia has been my home forever, other than going off to college. And I guess as a child, was really fortunate. I had a dad that was just an absolute beast in the whitetail woods, very, very lucky. At one time, he had the 14th largest buck ever taken in the state of South Carolina. Hardcore dad, instilled a really good hunting foundation, work ethic, and kind of a no-nonsense type of guy. And at 12 years old, he gave me a little sawed-off 243 and said, "Have at it." We had a big down on the Savannah River, on the South Carolina side of the Savannah River. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth and made probably every possible mistake that you could make. And I got, when I turned 16, I switched over to bow hunting, and I never will forget the first doe on the ground, spot and stalk, that I shot about 6 feet over her back, and I was absolutely hooked. And from that, I really, like you guys, man, daylight to dark, halfway in all my dreams, it's whitetail. So yeah, that's kind of who I am and where I got started.
That's funny you say that, because I was thinking about this weird routine I have is every night before I go to sleep, I kiss my wife, I hug her, and then I start thinking, I'm like, man, let's think about the biggest buck we possibly can a night to lull me to sleep. And I think about shooting it, but I'm not kidding. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud. That's probably what I go to sleep to every night, is thinking about shooting a big buck. And it seems like you're the same way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's bad. I guess it could be a much worse things than that. So I'll take that as a blessing and stick with chasing the deer.
There you go. What is the whitetail hunting culture like in South Carolina? When you think about all these states where big bucks are killed, and you talk about your dad killing a pretty good buck, what's it like? And because South Carolina is not really one you think about when you think about whitetail.
No, we have a ton of deer, and our season is really weird, and our laws are kind of outdated. I think 5 years ago we didn't have a limit on bucks, so guys,
gosh,
19, 20 bucks a year. And I think it was about 5 years ago, somebody I'm sure will correct me on when it happened, they passed a 5 buck limit. So you can shoot 5 bucks and I think 9 does in the state. And our rifle season comes in August 15th, and it goes until January 1st. So you can rifle hunt that entire time. You can run them with hounds, with dogs. They still have big dog drives in the southern part of the state. And so it is, to say it's challenging is an understatement for a bow hunter. But you do find spots. Pretty lucky. I have my best friend from when I was, 2-3 years old on this street right now. His family has a really nice hunting place on the Congaree River, and he kind of gives me full reign of that place. So I've got permission to hunt on that. And then a neighboring hunt club. And I don't know if you guys have these at home, but we have hunt clubs where, it'll be a timber company or a private landowner, and there'll be 10 or 12 guys that all go in for the lease, and then everybody has hunting rights. So that's kind of how I do it in South Carolina. I've got a couple little small urban spots as well, a little 40-acre, a little 20-acre here that's kind of butts up to town, and they've been real successful. I shot 3 here last year with my bow, and one of them came off of each property. I shot one on the little in-town spot, shot one on the private farm, and then one on the hunt club. So it was a good year in South Carolina.
Yeah. I always find that kind of curious when people kind of talk about their bag limits and certain things like that. But so we're trying to venture out, Lord willing, each year we try to go to a new state, whether that be just to scout or to hunt or whatever. But you have those instances where people, let's say from Florida, their shooter deer, if one walked by, they wouldn't pass up. Let's say that's maybe 115 inches. And then you go to Kansas or one of the Midwest states, it's just sometimes they don't even pick up their bow when a 150 walks out. What's the average, if a out-of-stater goes and is trying to fill their tag, what's a good size to kind of be looking out for in your state?
Yeah, so just to kind of put it in perspective, we have 4 bucks in the state all time, and that is the last I checked. It could have changed, but 4 bucks, the last I checked, that netted 170, that actually made the national book. So the unique thing about South Carolina is that August 15th opener. I think it's the second earliest season. I think there's one in Florida that may come in August 1st, but as far as whitetail, I think it's the second earliest season in the country, and it's neat. Guys come down and chase the velvet bucks. It's 100 degrees and 80% humidity, but it's
seed ticks everywhere.
Yeah, and the mosquitoes, in the Congaree are really bad. So, but it's a unique experience. I enjoy it. I hunt, just about every opening afternoon, and did kill one opening day this year. And to answer your question, if you're bow hunting in South Carolina, for us, it's more about age, trying to find a 4 or 5 year old buck, which is difficult to find. But if you shoot 125 makes our state record book, regardless of what weapon you use. So if you shoot a 120 incher, you've done really well. If you shoot a 130, something that's in Pope and Young, you've done extremely well.
Okay.
I would call that good no matter where I was on. Pope and Young's, that's about my standard. That's what I like to shoot.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you could get on them here. It would just take a lot of, like I guess everywhere else, it's challenging.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. We did want to dig into a lot more about travel hunting for whitetails out of state, but before we do, I did want to get a little bit, I heard it on a previous podcast, a little bit of you talking about it, but what can you tell us about your experience with the African safari hunting out of the country? How much of that have you done, and what's kind of your story there? I found that pretty interesting when you talked about it.
So one of my, I guess, goals when I was really little, I played sports in college, but obviously wanted to try and play professional, but that didn't work out. So another goal I had is I really wanted to be a professional hunter in Africa, and I had no idea how I was going to get there, how I was going to do it. My family had no interest in that. My dad absolutely had no interest in that. So I had to figure all that on my own, and finally got some guys over there to take me serious. And long story short, when I got out of college and baseball was over, I kind of went to Africa, and I would stay over there for anywhere from 3 to 5 months at a time, and did a long 7-year apprenticeship under some really good professional hunters, and then ended up getting my license and was able to guide some dangerous game hunts and a lot of plains game hunts. And as we got, get older, your priorities shift a little bit, and got married and had a kid. And, it got to a point where my wife was like, you're going to have to make a decision, if you want to live this this PH lifestyle where you're back and forth to Africa or have a family, you got to decide. And that was a very, very easy choice for me. We've got a great son now that's just gotten into college. And so, that was an easy thing, but I loved it over there. It was a lot of fun. I hunted in Mozambique, Tanzania, Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, spent a good amount of time in a lot of different countries, a lot of different cultures. And the beauty, with you guys being hunters, I mean, like if you're doing a 14-day or a 21-day safari, I mean, from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you get back to camp and sit around the fire, you're hunting. It may be it may be a sable one day, it may be a Cape buffalo, it may be a leopard, it may be a kudu, an impala, a warthog. You're just constantly hunting, and it was a real highlight. I look back and really cherish the time I spent over there.
So over there, is it kind of like how we perceive like coyotes or something, and like there's really no limit or anything like that, or
Yeah, everything has a quota. In South Africa, not so much. It's a little more commercialized, a little more modern, a little more like Texas. A lot of game ranches. But when you get into Mozambique, especially Mozambique and Tanzania, I was in northern Mozambique and southern Tanzania. It's as wild as it was, 1,000 years ago.
Really?
Oh yeah, and you have like the concession I hunted the most in Mozambique was 7,500 square kilometers. That's what I don't know what that equates to in miles, but it was really big, and we had quotas. You could shoot 15 impala, 3 leopard, everything. They did game survey. And when we first went in there, the poachers from Tanzania had really about wiped a lot of the plains game out. And, we would bring in anti-poaching teams and set those up and remove snares and work with the communities. And within 3 years, man, our plains game flourished. And it's hard for you guys understand this, but it's hard for guys to really that are outside of that space to understand that you're hunting these animals for their betterment, not their detriment. The economic relevance, what the dollars can bring for those communities over there is life changing. And, you shoot one old kudu bull and you have 30 other ones that survive. It's supernatural, and it really is conservation.
Yeah, that's the interesting part, right? It's like, it's kind of counterintuitive. You take it from a non-hunting perspective. I'm hunting something for the betterment of the animal to conserve it, because the poachers don't care about the animals one bit. Like, you care to the dollars that somebody's going to spend on an animal like that are insane, and it supports all kinds of activities in the region. But were you guys hunting? Is it like public land over there? Is it private? How is it set up?
So you get concessions. So you work with the government, and they'll set up if your listeners really want to dive into this, they can look at a map of Mozambique and they'll see the Nyasa Game Reserve way up northern Mozambique, right on the Tanzania border. And that's one of the largest national game reserves in Africa. It's huge. And around that reserve, they set up these what they call buffer zones, and those are hunting concessions. And when I started, there were only 6 of them. I think there might be 12 now, but there were 6 of them, and they were big. 7,500 square kilometers. And those buffer zones you would get a quota, and you would bid for that concession. And you'd set up a business plan, a game survey. I mean, it was very well thought out and done by guys that really understood and were true stewards of wildlife. So I guess you could call it public land, but when you had the concession, you were the only group hunting in there.
That's incredible.
So in all your time over there, like what's the craziest thing you've seen? Because I would think, like, kind of the way you were speaking just a second ago, how it was basically the same as it's always been. You must have had some pretty either freaky run-ins or some close calls with certain things.
Yeah, I did. I had a real close call with an elephant, and I had a small shootout with some poachers.
Oh, really?
those were the two that stick out. And I've told those stories a few times, and I'm happy to share them again here. The elephant, we got to back up for a minute, because that really turns off a lot of people when you talk about shooting an elephant. Right? That, a big dumb elephant that you just walk up to and shoot. Well, that is not reality. The elephants that are outside of these heavily protected game reserves are some of the smartest creatures on the planet. And something that people don't understand about elephants is they have 6 sets of molars, their teeth. And depending on what they live on, those molars can last from 8 to 10 years, depending on how much sand, that molars wear out. Each set will wear out. So, you can get a 60-year-old elephant and he's on his last set of molars, or his molars are gone. And then what happens, they die by starvation. That's how they pass away, is they starve to death. There's no other animal that takes them on. And when they die, the hyenas come in and jackals and devour them. But that is a slow, painful death. So, it's kind of the really good PHs when they track elephants. It's the size of the track, and it's also the dung. The dung will have undigested leaves in it, or grass, where they've eaten, but their molars were unable to grind them up. So it's undigested. And those are the elephants, that you hunt and that you target. So that, and it is one of the most remarkable historic hunts. You can track these things from daylight to dark, and they'll gain 15 miles on you in the night. And pick it back. And I could go on and on and on. And I know we don't have time, to keep talking about that. But this one particular elephant, had a client from Atlanta, and the brain shot is the most ethical thing. I mean, you shoot them in the brain, they're down, it's over, it's fast. And he got a little rattled and missed the brain. And as a PH, if you hit them in the skull, there's nothing up there but the brain and then just bone. So it's if you don't hit the brain, you've put a bullet in an elephant, and you're going to lose him. So as PHs, we're taught to immediately shoot one right behind the shoulder, to get one in the lungs. And I had a 500 double rifle, and so I touched my first barrel off, and normally they spin and they run, and he did. He fell, he jumped up, I shot him, he spun, but he did a 360, and he came right at me.
Oh, God.
And his ears are laid out, and he gets to about 16 steps, and they have a zygomatic arch on their head. If you look at an elephant, there's like this big bony structure on the side of their head, and that's called the zygomatic arch. And it doesn't matter what position his head's in, his brain sits right between that arch. So I just took my last barrel and went outside his head and found that arch and came into the middle and touched it off, and luckily brained him, and his head rocked back and he hit the ground. And I mean, you could feel the earth move.
Really? How close was he?
When he died, he was about 12 steps away, and that's a 6,000-pound animal he had about 60-pound tusk. So that was pretty nuts, and that's one I will never forget.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It sounds like he was about to play pinball with you guys.
He was. The trackers we were hunting in Mozambique, and they had ran all the way to Tanzania, and it took me about 2 days to get them back.
Goodness. So I'm not trying to stick too long on the elephant thing, but like, how long does it take to cut one of those things up and all that? Great
question. So 100% of that meat, everything down to the toenails, is used. The problem with doing that is you bring in the local vehicles, the local tribe, everybody gets hunks of meat, and then they start smoking it, and it smells up camp for 2 weeks. I mean, it's got smoking elephant meat all over camp, but you've never seen smiling faces when a local village comes into an elephant kill and starts getting real live protein out, that's going to sustain them for a long time. So it's quite an experience. I mean, they have a big giant water bladder inside of them. It's like a 50-gallon drum, and we cut it open, and it literally eroded part of the hill that the elephant was on. So, I mean, it's nuts how big they are.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Well, I did want to spend some time talking about the African safari. I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that, but we're not going to.
No,
I wanted to talk specifically with you about travel hunting for whitetails out of state. It's extremely popular right now. It seems like it's what everybody wants to do, and a lot of folks want to capture it on video, and there's a lot of good states to do it. But it sounds like and looks like from your wall behind you, you were doing this before it was the craze and it was cool. How did you start whitetail hunting out of state, and what kind of was the motivation to do it? Because in South Carolina, it sounds like you got unlimited bag limits, so you didn't have to go out of state, but why did you?
Yeah. So it's pretty simple. The size of the deer, we're kind of capped here. If you were to shoot like we talked about earlier, a Pope young buck here, you've really done something. And, like everybody else that watched, any of the videos growing up, seeing these Illinois bucks and these Iowa bucks and Kansas bucks and dreaming of shooting a Boone and Crockett with your bow, I knew that I had to go and travel. So that's kind of what got me started. And I started in Illinois hunting public land. I hunted there on some of the properties where you had to earn a buck. You'd have to shoot a doe first, and then you could, go and hunt a buck, and started on public land there. And then that morphed into, seeing a lot of pressure, a lot of people, and wanting to get on some private and starting to build relationships and figuring out how to find these small farms and get sole access to them. And that just kind of grew and morphed into doing the same, repeating the process in Ohio and Kansas and Kentucky, and, just unturning every stone you can possibly unturn and getting as much access as you can.
Were you doing the, like when you were going out, obviously these are probably 10-hour plus drives for you. Were you going out doing these hunts in big blocks? Were you going out and scouting before, or what was it like, a decade or two ago?
So at first, I would go for maybe 2 weeks, and that was a long trip. With my business, I'm able to be mobile. I'm able to operate, out of the office. So I'm able to be mobile. And the first one was more of, 2 weeks going, figuring things out in Illinois. I can remember staying until I killed my first buck out there. It was a 2-week trip. And then, with the revolution of the cell camera or the cell cameras, that changed things. And now I do quite a bit. Like I just got back from Ohio. We had a trade show up there, and, I went up there 2 days early before the trade show and looked at farms. And then I did a full day after the trade show and then, driving home and looked at 2 other properties. And so, that is, not to get away from your question, but to me, there's lots of guys that get to certain levels of hunting, or if you want to call it, like a Andre DeQuisto, a Don Higgins, these elite level hunters, a Dan Invault, whoever you want to throw out there, guys.
Jake Gaylord,
yeah. Do it. They've all gotten to such a high level that normally if they have a deer on their properties, they're going to get a really good crack at it. And what would separate, guys at that level are access. It's the farms they have to hunt on. And so that really is to me, and I saw that fairly young, that I needed as good access as I could get. And that's really my focus, in the entire off season and even in season, what's over the next mountain, what's over the next mountain, what's over the next mountain, I'm constantly grinding on that, trying to find better and new access.
What is your strategy today? I mean, obviously in a world of cell cams, you don't got to be there. So it's kind of set it, forget it from that perspective. But what are some tips or tactics that you use to gain access now? Because I think a lot of folks think I knock on this door, I get permission, they write it, I'm good. But I think these are longer lead time, longer relationship type of plays that it takes in the modern world to let somebody come shoot something with a bow and arrow.
Man, today it's so competitive, and it's difficult to do, but it's still doable. Let's face it, it's going to take some some financing, right? I mean, you've got to feed that hunting kitty. You've got to, $10 for the wife, $5 for the hunting kitty, right? So you gotta build those coffers, man. And unfortunately, that I won't say hunting's turned into a quote unquote rich man sport, but it sure seems like it's headed that way, and that's terrible. It's awful to see that happening. And but you need to have a small reserve of lease money, if you will. So let's get that out there. I mean, I'm going to step away from public land for a minute because, man, anybody that can travel, out of state, go to public land and kill a deer, that's a badge of honor. That's awesome. But you hear 100 times more horror stories about guys doing that and it sounds like, you guys may have been exposed to that, but
many.
Horror story after horror story. I mean, I've been on the trade show circuit for since January, and I'm not kidding you. Hundreds of guys have come up and said, "Man, I left North Carolina and went to Kansas to public, and there were 45 cars in the parking lot, and I walked under 6 different guys, and man, and that was just vacation time."
Yeah.
So not to go off on a tangent there, I respect all the guys that hunt public, and I'm amazed by them. I tip my cap to them. That's just not my thing. I really like to shoot deer. I like to eat it. I just got finished before we got on here eating a I like to stack them up, and I think stack the odds in my favor, hunting small private pieces that I have sole access to.
Yeah. It seems like free time is getting harder and harder to come by. And me personally, I'm a pretty big homebody. And, I lost my train of thought for a second. Yeah, but basically it seems like the older I get, the more I think of what I should be doing instead of hunting. But like a lot of people there's like this calling that kind of drags me back to the woods regardless, of what's on kind of the honey-do list or anything like that. And I feel like you can kind of relate with this because, like, obviously you have 2 companies, you said?
Yeah, we've got 3. I've got an outfitting business that does stuff in Africa and Argentina. I've got a vacation rental property business, and then Asio Gear. So those are the things that get me up at 4:30 in the morning and roll me until 10:30 or 11 at night.
Yeah,
right.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it definitely makes sense, especially like when you find these properties or these little gems that are like out of state, but yet they hold the monsters which you have behind you.
Yeah, and there is a strategy to it. Now where I am now, I've made relationships in all these states. That is the hardest thing. Back to your point a minute ago about how these relationships take time. They do. They absolutely take time, and a good one has to be protected. It has to become a real friendship too. It can't be one-sided. I show up in November and, hey, I'm back to hunt. If the guy likes NASCAR, man, send him some NASCAR tickets during whatever it is. We're from South Carolina, so we get really good seafood. So I've shipped shrimp to people, whatever it takes. But the initial move that I did, and I'll just go to Petersburg, Illinois, because I don't hunt there anymore, and I lost my property there, and that's a real bitter story, and I haven't been back. But they have a diner there where every farmer goes in the morning, gets coffee and eats breakfast, and complain about something. And so, me being from South Carolina, with my redneck accent, I would go in there and sit down for breakfast and start bringing up dialogue. And they're like, "What in the world are you doing here from South Carolina?" Well, I'm looking for somewhere to hunt. I'm trying to find a little lease or get on a spot. And they'll say, "Oh, son, I'll take care of you. I got a little farm."
Yeah.
That's one way to do it. And that takes a lot of effort, right? You got to go out there and, May, June, whatever it may be, long weekend and go meet people. Another tactic is look for farms that are for sale, that are listed, make relationship with some of the local realtors, especially the girls. Guys don't think about that, but you get a female there are females that hunt, but let's face it, the majority of female real estate agents that may be selling small lots or houses, which is what I love, those small urban lots in these little rural towns. that build those relationships with them. Hey, here's what I'm looking for. Do you have anything listed that you think's way overpriced and might take a while to sell? Would they like to have a little income, for this fall? And then I got a funny one the other day. I was on another podcast with some guys, and he told me that he had a buddy that would go to these little towns and go to the barbershop and get a haircut. He didn't care what town it was, but he would go into the barbershop because in these little towns, all the farmers and everybody hang out, and get, the barber knows everything. So he's Josh is probably going to kill me for. Oh, so be it. But so yeah, that's anything like that. But at the end of the day, like anything else you want to be good at, it's going to take hard work. It's going to take discipline, and you can't put it off. You got to dive right in, when it's time to do it.
You guys are putting some thought into it, like screw that traditional door knocking stuff.
Yeah,
now
you would never catch me knocking on a door. I would never do that ever.
Why's that?
I just think that it happens all the time. Everybody's got on X. Everybody looks and goes, "Ooh, that's backing up to a nature conservancy." With no hunting and that 30 acres. Think how many times that guy's been called.
Yeah.
People have pulled up into his driveway, whereas the Jim Bob from the barber calls him and says, "Hey, I got this really neat kid in here. I think you ought to give him." You've made a connection. You're coming. You're not coming right through the front door. You're coming through the side, and so yeah. I mean, guys get permission by door knocking. They do it all the time. But that's not a tactic that I personally.
Yeah, the door knocking's interesting too, because it's like. I don't think it's very tasteful in 2023 to try to get something for nothing. I've never really found that very tasteful, but I mean, a lot of people knock on the door. It's like, "Can I hunt?" And it's like, "What are you gonna do for me?"
Exactly.
I just wanted to hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some guys say, I read something today where a guy says he always volunteers manual labor. He'll go up and say, "Sir, if you let me hunt, I'll be happy to do anything around here that needs fixing or, whatever." And that's certainly an idea. I've never tried that either, but I heard that. So,
well, plus, I mean, it seems like, granted, I know like on all the online stuff, like people's really not going to like brag about, the normal stuff that happens, whether they just blatantly get rejected or whatnot. But I've heard some stories of people door knocking. Do you know who Lee Ellis is of Seek One?
Oh yeah, Jay Maxwell is actually. Do y'all know Jay? He was. Yeah. So he's actually going to be in Osseo this year in our camo, and he and I have become
nice
buddies. And so I know those guys. Yeah, they're in Atlanta. They're about 3 hours away from me.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, cool. Well, I remember Lee talking, I don't know if it was on a podcast or what, but he went to door knock on like probably 2 or 3 doors down from a buddy he was staying at. I forget which state he was hunting or whatnot, but he went up and knocked just like he normally did. And he said, didn't get an answer, but he knew someone was home just because there's a car parked in the driveway. Well, as he walked back to his neighbor's house, he didn't even get in a truck. He just walked down the road back to his neighbor's house. Out the window, he seen like 3 or 4 cop cars pull up to the neighbor's house where he just was. And so he said he's been through this a couple times. So he already, knew it was him and like, he's the reason the cops were there. And so he just walked back over there to kind of explain, hey, I'm just door knocking, trying to get permission to people's basically backyards to hunt. And I guess by the time he walked over there, like the cops were explaining, like, hey, you kind of need to stay back a little bit because I guess the homeowner was telling the cops that he was like really scared that someone was approaching his door because he didn't, recognize the guy or anything like that. And the dude, I guess there was some like a pane of glass on both sides of his front door. And I guess the dude had a pistol and it was like pointing it at him through the glass and waiting on him to like go for the handle or something. And the dude literally told the police officers that like he was like squeezing the trigger because he was like so scared a little bit. And he said, I mean, obviously it freaked him out, he said, but he was like, yeah, like now, he always has those second thoughts when approaching like just every single house, he kind of makes sure like possibly could the person be mentally ill that lives here, but
my gosh, I mean, it is. People are they're not as neighborly as they used to be, obviously, but those guys, those Seek One guys, are machines. I mean,
they are, yeah.
tactics down pat. They work their tails off, and that works for them. So it's they've got that down pat, and kudos to them. They've shot some monster bucks and know how to do it.
What has been one of your, so I know I saw in several episodes, podcasts you've done, that you've done a lot of different states for whitetail. What has been one of your favorite states that you've done? And can you talk a little bit about one of your favorite hunts you've done out of state? The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Right now, I would say, I've loved them all. I've really warmed up to Ohio here lately. It's only 7.5 hours to Southern Ohio. So I'm
just right up the road.
Yeah,
right,
still a truck.
bad at all. So if you had to say, Joe, you've got to go shoot a Boone and Crockett this year, I would go to Kansas. Yeah, I really like Kansas. I like the prairie. I like the draws in Kansas. They're pretty easy to hunt. Knock on wood. Nothing about hunting a big mature whitetail is easy, but it kind of funnels them down. You're able to really get good pinch points, especially pre-rut, and you just got to log your hours in the tree. And there are a lot of big deer. And again, you got to have access. You got to find the right farm. But if you told me right now you got to go shoot a 170 this year, it would be in Kansas.
You said the word Kansas, so you kind of opened up that can of worms for me. What do you think of that new trail camera ban?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of guys talking about that. Look, I'm no dog in the fight. I'm going to follow the rules, and whatever the rules are, whether I agree with them or don't agree with them, if they outlaw baiting and they outlaw crossbows and they outlaw compounds and you got to shoot them, with a slingshot, So, I think it's. The part I don't like about it is the people that made the decisions don't have a clue. Those Exodus boys, Chad and Cameron and all of them are buddies of mine, and they did a really good, I guess, podcast or interview or something where they, I guess they had footage or something of some of the guys that were making those decisions. And anytime a decision is made, unfortunately, by our government, I'm not going to go off on a political soapbox here, but anytime, it's made by people that really don't understand and there's no really strong counter argument, it's a little bit embarrassing, I feel like. And I think it's horrible they did it. But again, it is what it is.
I seen that or I listened to the podcast that you were referring to with the Exodus guys. And I thought it was kind of funny because obviously I don't want to just word for word say their whole podcast or whatever. But I remember at the very end, they said they finished the whole podcast with one of the quotes and from one of the chairmen, the commissioners saying, and they were like, how can you tell the difference between a regular camera and a cell cam? And that's how they exited the podcast. And so you can definitely tell they're not happy about it either. But it's kind of ridiculous because it's just like they take the most basic, doesn't have anything to do with anything. And they're like, okay, we're going to put our name on this and just to say we did something.
Yeah. It's my understanding, and I haven't researched it near enough, but it's my understanding that they felt like people having trail cameras in the woods caused people to go in and out of the woods and stress the wildlife more. Well, buddy, let me tell you something. If I can't run trail cams, I'm gonna be in the woods every day.
See, that's the thing.
I got to go do old school woodsmanship, and I'm gonna be spending a whole lot more time in the woods than if I've got 5 or 6 trail cameras going. That is counterintuitive, crazy argument, and it stinks. Maybe it'll get overturned.
I'm not surprised.
I don't know anymore. I don't know anything, it seems like, anymore, but it is what it is. Yeah. But anyways, let's get back on a lighter note.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about Kansas a little more. We had our first experience in Kansas last season. All 3 of us hunted Kansas, Southeast Kansas, on public. We shot a couple bucks on public. And one of the things I really liked about Kansas, I guess it could be a pro and could be a con, but I remember looking at the Onyx map before we went up in the summer, and I was like, maybe this is a little cocky or arrogant, but I was like, I kind of feel like I can tell where a big deer is going to be, right? There's lots of ag, lots of water, limited cover. I was like, the issue is going to be getting away from people and stuff. And I think we found that to be true. But talking on the limited cover aspect of it, there was a pretty cool story that you told about a giant you killed this last year in limited cover. What have you learned in those big prairie places on where those big bucks can hide?
Yeah, man, it is. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm going to use the word embarrassed again. I got embarrassed by that buck. I'm humiliated by that buck. And I can go into the whole story if you guys want to. Okay, so this deer, he was known as the Tracks buck, and it's about 120 acre farm that has just this I guess creek draw that runs through the middle of it, and that's all the cover that there is. And then it hits some railroad tracks, and right on the other side of the railroad tracks is this huge cedar thicket, probably 80 acres of just cedars, nasty thickness. And that's where the buck was living the first year. And that's where we were sure that he was living, because it was just nasty in there, thick. And looking at an Onyx or on a map, you're like, yep, deer bedded in there. So when he was a 4.5-year-old, he was probably in the mid 170s. There was a bad snowstorm, and buck comes over the railroad tracks into this draw, and it's blowing about 30 miles an hour. And a buddy of mine shot him in the ham and never could find him. And that he looked and looked and looked, and actually walked over the tracks and went into that big cedar thicket. And so there were rubs and beds and scrapes, and it was just deer heaven over there. And so that we became fixated on that spot, and that was the bedding. We had the food, and then there was a funnel between. The following year, I had a good buddy that went and hunted the deer as a 5-year-old and never saw him. All nighttime pictures. Hunted him for the entire season, and he had grown. As a 5-year-old, he was in the upper 180s, low 190s. And as a 6-year-old, let's see. Nobody hunted him, thought he died. He showed back up as a 7-year-old, and then I hunted him the whole season. He had 3 big flyers coming off the back of his G2 on his right side, and he was in the low 190s as a 7-year-old, and probably weighed 350 pounds. And I'll have to send you guys some pictures. It's one of the biggest whitetail bucks. I mean, his neck. I mean, it was like a Cape Buffalo neck. I mean, I'm getting him fully body mounted. I'm getting the whole thing mounted. But anyway, just the body was massive.
Did you measure the neck, by the way?
I did not. No.
Okay.
I can get my taxidermist to tell me what it is, but it's stupid big. So I hunted him the whole year, knowing that he was coming out of that big thicket. And last picture I got of him was at night, like November 2nd. And I'm like, I'm going to kill you, like at 7:00 at night. Never saw him again. Hunted for like 17 days in a row for him. Last day, getting close to Thanksgiving, big mature, and it's very limited deer out there. So I would sit some days, daylight to dark, and see 2 coyotes the whole day. I mean, it's taxing on the mind. And
so you're doing all day sits, like 17 days?
Not every single day, but some of the days, yes.
I gotcha.
the wind would change and I would have to get down and move because of wind. But in 17, let's call it 17 days, probably 6 of those were all day sits.
Still yet, dadgum.
Yeah, it was taxing. And I ate about 45 Little Debbies and put on. But anyway, last day, 10 o'clock in the morning, here comes a big mature doe right up the draw. I mean, it through the funnel. I'm like, he's going to be right behind her. Here we go, finally. And she walked right through the bottom of the draw, up the funnel, and off she went by herself, and not another deer in sight. And closing time came. I climbed down, packed all my stuff, and drove back to South Carolina the next morning. So we were sure the buck was dead. Somebody had killed him. And so him being an 8.5-year-old, I actually, got in another farm and killed a buck pretty quick, a nice one, an older deer. And my buddy had another guy that went into this place to try and shoot a couple does, I believe. And he was pretty lazy. And right by the main road on the other end of the property, and this is where the story gets funny, is an old like cattle barn, a little small dilapidated cattle barn. And he walked behind that barn, dumped out a corn pile, and put a trail camera on it. And that buck daylighted on the corn pile. And he went in there and no wind, not using the wind right, nothing. I guess blew him out. And 2 days later, he said, I can't stand it out here. There's no deer. I'm leaving. So he left, and I'd already killed a buck. And I said, all right. I pulled the map up and really started looking. Well, on the other side of the road, from the opposite end of the property from where that big thicket is, was a little 6-acre plot owned by a widow that allowed no hunting, and it was just a grown-up cattle pasture. And I said, I am the dumbest hunter that's ever killed a deer. How did I overlook this? And I got back out there in the summer and I looked at it. She wouldn't let me walk on it, but I looked at it on the topo, and it had a rise. He was betting on that rise, and he could, every time you would drive in that property or drive out of that property or get out of your truck to walk into that funnel, he could see you. He knew going in and out of there every time. And so I got real confident then, because it was a small funnel out of that little thicket, that little grown-up cattle pasture that led out to the ag. And I could get in on a north wind, and it's that old saying, and a wind that would be really good for him, and he could still never smell me. And it set up perfect for that. And it was pretty good for a south wind. So I'm going to fast forward the story. I went back out, set a couple stands up, north wind stand, south wind stand, put some cameras out, got everything played, ready to go. And this was October 14th. I'd planned on coming back Halloween and staying again until Thanksgiving, or as long as it took. And I landed back in South Carolina. My text camera pings 8:05 in the morning. He's walking through the funnel, going back to bed in daylight. And I kissed my wife on the cheek, jumped right back on an airplane, flew right back out there. I actually stayed home for 2 days, but there was a cold front coming. But hopped right back on the plane, flew back out there. Buddy let me borrow an old Suburban. Drove out to the place, got in that stand about 2:00 in the afternoon, and perfect north wind, good wind for him. And a doe comes out to a little picked bean field, and I'm looking at her, and I hear a fence wire pop, a deer jumping over a fence wire. And I said, I bet that's him. And all of a sudden she throws her head up, and she's looking down the draw. And then all of a sudden his antlers just pop out, and he's 18 yards, 20 yards away, and he's standing right behind a tree, and it's getting to be closing time. It's getting dark, and he takes 2 steps forward, and I got the full draw and hit him right through the shoulders, and he went about 50 yards, and the celebration began. Man, it was awesome.
How long were you sitting there watching him?
I mean, it felt like 2 hours, but
right.
Probably reality, 5 minutes.
That's way too long for a deer of that caliber.
Yeah, way too long. Yeah, I had a bow just sitting on my leg, with my hand on my release, and it was just waiting for him to take. I just, you start thinking, man, I could probably get one right there.
That little devil on your shoulder.
Oh, yeah, he was sitting right there.
Yeah.
Oh, you can make that shot. And I was like, no, I'm not screwing this up.
So what do you think about, you've got thousands of dollars invested, all this time invested, years hunting this buck, somebody's injured him. What's going through your brain in full draw? You hit your anchor points, your eye goes to that peep sight on a 180 plus inch buck. What are you doing to calm yourself down, or what are you thinking?
I'm getting mad at myself. I'm follow through, because sometimes I'll have a tendency in the heat of the moment to drop my bow arm, to see where the arrow hits. And so I get mad at myself and just say, follow through, dummy, and just really concentrate on the spot and just laser focused. And that's a tactic that I use is I don't worry about anything but follow through. If I just fixate on that, I normally will make a pretty decent shot.
Yeah, that's good, because a habit that I've had to break probably in the last 5-ish years is I was celebrating as soon as I saw the deer. Like, I had pinata out, I was celebrating, and just seeing the deer was the win. So I had already picked out the form he was going on the wall on his way in. And one of the things my uncle told me is he was like, listen, dude, we can celebrate all you want when you kill him. Like, we can celebrate for 2 days, a week, I don't care. But that's one thing I had to do to myself. It's like, I have to almost go blank. Like, I don't care about anything else. I try not to even think that it's a deer. I'm just drawing back and I'm just shooting like I'm in the yard. And it's almost like cold-blooded, stone-cold face, and I'm not thinking about anything else, and then I just lose it.
Yeah, I get it, man. When he ran out there in that little, pasture or whatever you want to call it, and fell over. I mean, we were running out of light, but I saw his white belly, laying there, and I was just, I couldn't believe it. I was, oh man, it was something.
Can you describe that deer?
Yeah, so he was.
Or I guess when you killed him.
Yeah, he had 48 inches of mass. His beams had shrunk a little bit. His tine length had shrunk a little bit because he was 9.5, and he didn't grow his flyers that year. So he ended up scoring like 182 and 6/8. I think that's what he ended up scoring. But if he had any of that other stuff, he'd have been mid 190s. And just I will say this: his back end was run down a good bit. He still had the big barrel chest and giant neck, but his back end was, and it could be because it was October, and he wasn't really rutted all the way up yet. But I noticed that about his back end that it was run down a little bit.
When I saw that picture of that buck when you killed him, it was like, when I think Midwest, I think big mass, big bodied Midwestern deer. That was the perfect example of one. Huge body, great mass, like. That deer was a shining example of a Midwestern deer, I think.
Yeah, I memean, for me, it probably, I've killed bigger deer than that, but the whole story and how that unfolded, that's probably one of the most special ones that because it's so much history, so much went into it, and I didn't really get teary eyed, but there was a bit of man. An old warrior, lived out his whole life, outsmarted me a bunch of times. There's some sadness there. I guess you could say that, or the chapter's closed and it's over. But he's going to be right here in my house here in no time, and I'll remember that for as long as I'm alive, and my kids will too. So it's a good it's a good closing of that chapter.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like I killed a deer last year that I've been hunting for a couple years, a mainframe 6x7, 7.5-year-old Oklahoma buck. And it is that perfect ending to the novel, right? Because it's like you have so much reverence and respect for an animal. And I think about this, I'm like, man, this deer was alive when I freaking graduated high school. And he's lived, he hadn't get hit by a car. Nobody else has shot him enough to kill him. And now every day when I walk into my office, I'm like, respect. Like, yeah. It's awesome to have that trophy to do that with.
For sure. Without a doubt.
So there's a lot of folks that want to do an out-of-state hunt. Like, I think the 1 week out-of-state hunt is extremely popular now. And you've done a lot of them. So from your perspective, what are some of the main things that you think hold people back from not going on one, but being successful? Is it the preseason work? Is it the access? Is it a combination of all those things? What would you tell somebody?
Without a doubt, it's the preseason work. It's getting out there and already picking your trees, already picking how you're going to get to your tree, already picking the wind direction you need for the tree. It's the whole process. And what that takes is it takes going in July. The family wants to go to the beach. Well, go to the beach, but it might be an all night drive, right? For you. You might have to just drive it all night. And the harder you work at it, the more successful you'll be. And that is definitely, there's a guy named Bobby Worthington. I don't know if you guys have him, but he's a buddy and one of the best whitetail deer hunters on earth. And he's got a saying, if you're willing to get up at 3:00 in the morning and go move a trail camera because it's raining at 3:00 in the morning, and that's when you need to go and do it, or move a stand at 3 a.m. when it's raining so you don't disturb anything, then you're on the right path. And that is, if you keep that mentality, and equate that to out of state, if you don't have a connection there and it is 7 hours away from you and a camera runs out of batteries, right? Man, I'll just change them when I get there. That's not being disciplined. You need to figure out a way. If you don't have a buddy that can go do it for you, you got to figure out a way to put the family to bed, drive all the way out there, get the camera redone, and drive all the way back. That's the discipline it takes. And I think, your question was what keeps people from being successful, and that's it. It's the discipline that separates guys.
You seem to be one of the guys that is really detail oriented, all these steps in a row. I got to do these things. And I think one thing I've realized is I'm very often tempted to skimp on something. I'm like, oh, that limb's fine. There's no way that's going to happen. Or no, my tree's at 13 degrees. It really needs to be at 27 to get this perfect shot, but I'll just keep it that way. I don't want to mess with it again. Was there a scenario that made you that way? Because from my perspective, it seems like those little bitty micro details are the things that, like Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it's going to happen. Is there a scenario that made you that way?
And it wasn't whitetail hunting. It was hunting giant leopard with one of the best PHs to ever set foot in Africa. I had the pleasure of being an apprentice under him, and he was probably one of the best cat hunters. He's passed away now, but his level of detail and professionalism in hunting was just, it was off the charts. The way that he, you keep a what they call a gut barrel that you drag scents in, and the way he would put the wires of the bait animal that you would have in the tree, the way he would build his blind, the way he would get the trackers to drop you off in the evening before you hunted, just every minute detail, because those are super expensive hunts, and he was 100% successful on his leopard hunts, and he had a process, and it paid off. And if you tried to shortcut that in any way, and being with that guy for 2 or 3 years, I just brought that home to the whitetail space. And whitetail's always been my passion, really, since like we talked about earlier, since I was little, and just equated it to that, to preparation. And it's not for everybody, and it can make it more work than fun. But if you look at it like and this is, everybody uses this analogy, but like a pro athlete, like a Tom Brady, when you wake up in the morning and every decision that you make that day, is that going to make me a better whitetail hunter, or is that going to get me further away from my goal? My goal is a 150. Is the decision I make not to shoot the bow this morning before I go to work, is that going to get me closer to killing that 150 or further away? Opening my second story window and shooting from an elevated position with my bow at 5 yards, at 10 yards, at 40 yards, getting down, having to go downstairs and move the targets to different positions instead of just shooting in the backyard. If every decision you look at, first off is why am I doing it, and is it going to get me closer to my hunting goal? Those are the disciplines that man, if guys stick to that, the success is there for the taking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think most people it's a decision, right? You have to decide, is this something that I enjoy a weekend a year, or is this something that I want to be the absolute best at? I kind of come from the mind of like, I don't really want to do anything halfsies. I don't want to go halfway on anything. And it's like, these animals are hard enough. Like Hunter's Advantage is like our name. Like it's already hard enough to kill one. We're trying to stack the deck as much as we can on our side to get that animal. And it's like, it seems like, I don't know if it's true, and there's no data to support this in any way, but it seems like the woods keep score. Like it knows.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It does. And to back up just a hair, there's nothing wrong. I got lots of really good buddies that love to go sit in a tower stand with snacks over a food plot and a feeder and have their kid in there with them. And I love that. They're getting out, they're enjoying the wild, they're enjoying our resource, they're hunting, they're taking a couple does and they're feeding their families. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. I love it. I encourage it. But we're just talking about, following your goals on big deer and what it takes to consistently, get on those type bucks. And it takes that discipline of not overlooking anything and not saying that's good enough, continuing to improve in every facet.
Speaking more like on let's say the harder states to get into to hunt, do you have a lot of experience with like applying for those sought after units like in Kansas or anything like that, like building up preference points?
So Kansas, I've been real fortunate. This will be the year I don't get drawn. So I've gotten drawn most years there. I do own a small farm with another guy, so I can get a landowner tag there. We own a little small 80-acre farm, and he's a resident, so he can always get his tag. So if I didn't get drawn, I could get the landowner tag for that farm, and I'd have to hunt that farm. I do not, like Iowa, I completely stay away from Iowa because it is so hard to get drawn. And I really, so much can change in 3 years, and I really like to find my properties and just keep adding to those and really understanding them, seeing how they change, seeing how the crop rotation affects the deer, and being very hands-on. And in Iowa, if you get drawn every 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, so much is going to change. Now, you could say, okay, Iowa, that's one of the best states to kill a booner. There's no doubt about it. So you could get vested there and say, okay, I'm just going to keep my leases or keep my properties. And even years I don't have a tag, I'm going to keep tabs on everything. And every 3, 4, 5 years, I'm going to be able to hunt it. And that would, certainly fine. But I personally don't do that. I like to go to states where I'm pretty much guaranteed a tag and can keep track of what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. But we had this conversation on the phone the other day about like trying to apply to like different states and trying to start as soon as possible, because I mean, point creep's a thing, like, basically no matter where you go. And even in Oklahoma, like we have draw out for elk, antelope. Oh, what's the other one?
Mule deer.
We might have one from Muley, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But regardless, like you need to put in basically now. That way, you don't put in when you're, I guess, financially stable, if that's ever going to be a thing. Didn't know how you kind of took on that, or if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of buddies that sheep and goat hunt, and they put in for all the tags, and they get points and bank points, and a lot of guys put in for Iowa every year, and yeah, I mean, there are services that can do that for you if you're, any of your listeners or maybe unsure about how to do that. I think there's one called Epic Outdoors, and they have a service you can pay. I don't know, it's like $100. It's probably more than that, but they send you like a personal profile that you fill out. Like I want to put in for the best mule deer units in the in the country, or I want to put in for where I can get a tag every other year. It's kind of what your personal preference is, what you're trying to do, and that's a really good service. I think Cabela's Tags maybe has something like that as well. But that Epic Outdoors, I'm hearing real good things about that, and it's a service that can walk you through the process, because a lot of that paperwork and stuff is really confusing and be intimidating. So I think that service is really well worth it. And then when you do get, you're South Carolina and you're putting in for a good unit in Utah for mule deer. I mean, we don't know anything about Utah, but that same service knows the good units. They know the good guys, or they know the areas to go and scout if it's a DIY hunt. So yeah, that would be my advice there.
Yeah, I think there's several of those. Funny story. I went to apply for like an elk tag in New Mexico the other day because I wanted to start building up some points, and there's some great units in the national forest and stuff. And I forgot that you had to pay for the tag up front like we did in Kansas when you go to draw it. And I was like, oh, I'm not paying $800. I know I'm not getting the tag. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah. And you know, I did that one time and was like, I want to put in for all the sheep, all the mule deer, and only the best units. Mm-hmm. And I got a credit card bill. And I was like, what the heck? Oh my God. I didn't win a tag, and I still, you know, you get a lot of that money back, you know, when you go home, but they hold it for like 90 days sometimes. And so, yeah, you definitely got to be careful and read the fine print. No doubt.
Yeah. So speaking on a more of a logistical or a planning side, what is planning the details of the logistics, and when does kind of planning your whitetail hunts start? Do you start at the beginning of the year and say, I want to do X, Y, Z? Like this last year, I think you killed 7 bucks. Like, how do you go about setting your goals and plans for the year?
Yeah, kind of what deer in the areas that I hunted that I know survived or made it, you know, into the end of the year. Like there's a really big one in Kansas. He was only a 3-year-old, and I know that he made it through. And if I get drawn there, that's probably the deer I'm going to set my sights on for the year, back in Kansas. But as far as, you know, like Ohio, like I was up there and I've got a lease with a buddy up there, and we just added another little 40 acres. And then I got super lucky, and at one of the trade shows, I had a gentleman that came up, and he owned a farm and just bought another small farm, and said that if I would come help him set up his farm, I could have the other one to myself. So I kind of am trading him, you know, out that for being able to hunt the other farm. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Ohio this year, which I didn't do last year. And then Kentucky is kind of an automatic because you can get a tag over the counter. It comes in September 2nd, I believe, this year. So I'll get out there at the end of August and really start hitting the bean fields, glassing out there, and, you know, I've got access already to some farms out there. So I guess the main ones are Ohio, Kentucky, and hopefully get drawn in Kansas. I've got some buddies in Saskatchewan and Alberta as well. And those are always kind of in the back pocket, but those are tough nuts to crack. I mean, you know, just getting up there is tough. Getting your stands up there is tough. And then one thing I found, and I don't know if you guys have any Canadian listeners or not, but
few.
Listen, any real hardcore Alberta bow hunters out there, at Joe Miles Hunting is. And I am trying to figure that out, because I really think the next world record is going to come out of Alberta. But I have found the guys up there, there are some good hunters. I just haven't met a lot of them that take the archery and the early season stuff very seriously. I think because they're so spoiled during their rut, you know, that rifle November 1st rut, and the deer are running wild, and there's, you know, all the crops are out. And so it makes it a little bit easier to hunt up there. But man, there are some incredible whitetail genetics in Alberta. So I'm always trying to figure that out, and I haven't. I've got a list of people to call next week, you know, and just start building. I've hunted with 5 different guys up there, and I keep, you know, thank you and move on, because it's just not what, you know, we had expected.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to Saskatchewan in May for black bear, which I'm excited about. First time over the border for hunting.
Where are you going?
Tower Lodge Outfitters, northern. It's north of Saskatoon, 2 hours.
Tell me you'll be there around the 15th of May.
I will be.
Okay, I'll see you at the Saskatoon airport. I'll land on the 15th. That's the day after Mother's Day.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we fly from Charlotte to, I think, Minneapolis or something like that. Minneapolis into Saskatoon, get 2:00, and then we've got about a 3-hour drive straight north of Saskatoon. So,
nice.
Yes,
sounds like we'll be pretty close.
Yeah, I'll buy a steak once we kill our bears.
I'm in. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, perfect.
So there's a lot of the first guy I ever had on the podcast, his name Iad Yawi. He was an author of a really popular bow hunting book called Crimson Arrows, a bow hunting odyssey, and he had done a lot of the animals on the Big Game Super Slam. But he always came back and he told me, he said, whitetail is probably still the toughest animal that I've ever shot, is like the pure will to live. Like with your African experience, do you think whitetail's the toughest, or is an animal that you're like, no, this one's kind of got a little bit more drive than a whitetail to live?
Yeah, I mean, a Cape buffalo, obviously, but if we're talking, plains game species, wildebeest are insanely tough. I equate it to this: whitetail are tough, no doubt about it. And I'll say this: a guy that can consistently kill a 4.5, 5.5, 6.5-year-old whitetail with his bow, he can kill anything on the planet. It is, other stuff is not as hard to get on as big mature whitetail. But I equate it to saltwater fishing being Africa and freshwater fishing being North America. The saltwater fish are just, they're constantly kill or be killed. It's just it's a law of the jungle, and it's aggressive, and those things are tough and hard. And North America game, they don't have lions and leopards and badgers and hyenas and things that are constantly, big time predators. We've obviously got mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats, but it's just not the same.
Right.
So that would be my thing. Whitetail are definitely tough, and I think they're way tougher than mule deer. I've shot a few elk, so I don't have a lot of experience there, but I would imagine, when I did, elk hunt, I've seen gut shot bulls rip arrows out of their stomach and keep right on rutting. So I would think an elk, is a really tough, hardy animal too.
We shot some antelope, and it just seems like antelope, you give them a reason to die, they will. It's like the wind blows pretty hard and they're like, I'm going to go bed down, I'm done. And then you shoot, like I shot one buck on public land a couple of years ago. I shot him 3 times before he died, and a couple of them were fatal shots. I'm like, dude, this is nuts. It's crazy how some animals just give up, and then some are like, no, you're going to have to kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Jake.
I was just going to ask a little personal question real quick, like that kind of relates to our hunting style. So we hunt a lot of mountainous, like public land in Oklahoma, and it seems like it can be tough to like locate the big bucks in areas with sort of kind of low deer density. If it doesn't have low deer density, then it's kind of fooled me, because we hardly ever see, a lot of deer at one point. But in like the more big wood setting, it seems like it's like a lot less patternable. And with you hunting basically all over the world, when you hunt those mountainous areas, like what's the first thing you kind of look for that makes you want to set up shop? Basically, is it like food, terrain, or sign, or I guess it could be like a combination of all of them? But
yeah, so edges for me, any transition from like big timber to cut over timber, those edges are what I really key on right off the rip. And then in hill country, and I don't have a ton of experience in hill country. I've got some, and I have a general grasp of it. I look for the creek crossings, the benches, the funnels, any type of terrain feature that can really funnel them down. Learned a lot from Bobby Worthington on that. His style is pretty unique. He finds the tree in the funnel that most of the corridors, most of the trails come through. He gets a good wind for each side, and then he just lives in that tree, or depending on the wind, one side or the other. And eventually, from the end of October until Thanksgiving, that buck is going to come through that funnel rutting, and he absolutely burns that spot up in big hill country, because that's what he hunts. And so that finding that thing is not easy, finding that ideal funnel. But those trails, especially this time of year and maybe a month ago, in the last, let's call it 4 to 6 weeks, those trails in the big woods really pop this time of year. And you'll find the rubs normally on the other sides of those funnels where those trails come through. Maybe they're not right in the funnel, but and I mean a feature or a creek or blown down trees, whatever it may be, that really tightens down those trails into one area. So that's the edges is what I look for first, and then try and figure out the trails and how they're moving through there, and then locate that funnel.
That's a good point. Have you ever heard of Parker McDonald?
I have not.
Well, he had Bobby Worthington on on his podcast before, and that's where I first got introduced with Bobby's whole philosophy and stuff like that. But Parker was saying that basically what he looks for in those type of scenarios is like almost like an X marks the spot, right? And so on each corner of the X, you have like either a different terrain feature or something along the lines where, let's say in the big woods, you have this big old pine thicket on one corner of the X, and then maybe there's a pretty nice little oak flat up on the top right corner, and then maybe there's a little bit of water on the left, and then whatever else, maybe a good drainage on the bottom left. But he said, look for basically where all that X touches, and then within that, look for the sign. And it seems like that's what we try to do. But I mean, I feel like anyone who's hunted big woods kind of somewhat understands this. Like, it seems like you can do everything right, but at the end of the day, when you don't see something, you're kicking yourself and you feel like the biggest idiot in the world. But I don't know. I try to ask everybody that question just to try to get, more opinions than one.
Yeah. And the big woods hunting, man, I mean, I hunted 17 days on a private piece in Kansas and saw several days, more coyotes than I did deer. So that stuff happens. You got to stay confident and stay in your brain and know that you're in the right spot and take your lickings when that happens. And if you have to move or whatever, you just, that's part of the game, man. You definitely don't go out every day and see deer, and you definitely don't go out every day and shoot one. So it
sure makes those wins sweeter when you take some lashings.
Yes, it does, no doubt.
So I did want to shift the conversation just a little bit. So there's a lot of folks that are still in the camp of blue jeans and Carhartts, and we love those folks. And you can definitely kill deer with anything. I kill them in a brown hoodie about half the time when it's hot most of the year. But for folks that are walking around looking like the Michelin Man, like we did for like our whole early hunting career until we finally got out of college, why does a good garment matter, and why does a good camo pattern matter from your perspective?
Yeah, obviously Asio Gear is my clothing brand. That's our company, and we got exposed to the really high end premium stuff in the mountains, mountain hunting, and found out what a windproof laminate was, found out what a waterproof membrane was, found out what stretch was. Much thinner layers that kept you just as warm, if not warmer. Really high end insulation. And some of those hunts are life and death. If you don't have the right rain, you're in Durango Mountains in Alaska and you getting some rough stuff, you can be in trouble without the right gear. And I wanted to bring that to the whitetail space. That's kind of the gap that I saw, was the real high end premium stuff that was ultra quiet. With a good camouflage pattern. And so that's exactly what we did is and the reason that's important, and again, going back to your opening statement in this little section here, guys kill big deer in plaid, flannels, and blue jeans every day, and it can be done. I will put our late season bibs and late season jacket in -25 with a 40-mile-an-hour wind up against any plaid and any pair of blue jeans. You get to sit there comfortably for 4 to 6 hours, in that kind of weather. And if you don't have gear like that, immediately your head is going, I'm going back and getting a cup of coffee. I'm not going to see anything today. You start, your brain starts playing tricks on you because your core's getting cold. And so we built a line that it's when it's super, super hot, you're going to be as comfortable as you possibly can be. And when it's super, super cold, you can sit on the stand longer than you could in regular common clothing. And then we have everything in between. And then the camo, I'm a huge believer in nature. I think nature got it right. And if you look at every ambush predator in the woods, whether it's an owl, whether it's a hawk, whether it's a bobcat, whether it's a mountain lion, whether it's a leopard, hyenas, coyotes, those are wolves, those are more pack animals. But any ambush predator, one that sits and waits, he is camouflaged. There's a reason nature made every ambush predator camouflage. They blend in their environment, and and what it does is, if they're still, they could be solid brown. Mm-hmm. But move. And that's what camouflage does. And again, it doesn't matter how many times I tell this story, sometime in the comments, you don't need camo to kill a deer. I understand it. But we're talking about inches here. We're talking about millimeters here. And if I've been sitting there for 6 hours and on my last day of vacation, and I turn to my left, and that 150 buck I've been after is right there, and my camouflage is going to help me blend better when I just moved or when I draw my bow, it's worth it. And why would you not do that is another question that I can't ever figure out. If you've got good quality gear, regardless of what color it is, why would you not want to have good quality gear that can do that and a good camouflage pattern for blending into trees if that's what you're doing? So for us, it's really a no-brainer, and we are pumped with how it's come over the last 3 years with Osseo, and guys are starting to pick it up. The exciting thing to me is we've got real industry professionals that are killers that are coming by and saying to our booths and saying, man, I want everything from early season to late season. I want the entire system. So guys are starting to pick it up, starting to see it. And I really feel like it's going to help guys. It's going to help them. And anytime you can provide a product that really is going to help people, that helps you sleep good at night.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think it goes back to that, the details section where we're talking about you have to control the controllables. And if you can control yourself from shaking like a leaf on a tree, I would like to do that when a big buck's walking by. Or you can control, like you said, when you're moving a little bit and something maybe not catching that movement because you're just deep setting them back a little bit, blending in a little bit more. Those are the things you can control. You can't control when your arrow hits a limb or something else crazy happens. But those are the things that before the hunt you can actually take part of and make sure you got in line.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely right.
So there's a lot of folks that they're like you just said, the folks that jump in, they buy everything at once, they go the entire system. But I think the majority of folks are more dip their toes in kind of people. So for folks that would want to maybe get a good staple piece, something they can wear a majority part of the season in most environments, what are those couple pieces, maybe a top and a bottom, that is for those budget-minded people that just want to get a couple pieces of Asio gear and maybe try it out?
Our Sherpa jacket and Sherpa pants, they're 100% windproof. They have a waterproof membrane. They're ultra quiet. When they freeze, they won't crinkle. And they're good. You can wear those things with no base layers in the mid 40s, and then you can base layer that thing up and get down into the mid 20s. So that's going to cover a lot of your, if guys are traveling, for the rut and hunting that November 1st to November 15th, that's going to be really good there. If you wanted to parlay that with something for, a little bit earlier bow season, you could add our midweight pants, midweight hoodie, and our vest. And then you've got a really good system that's really going to get you through most of the state's entire, bow season. Obviously when we get into late November, December, when it starts to get bitter, you got to go heavy. But that system right there, and it all can be layered. So you need, with that system right there, simple base layers underneath it, you can literally hunt from the mid 60s all the way down to the mid 20s.
That's awesome. Can you briefly tell the story about I believe it was a great horned owl, but I really do I will say I got a compliment. I don't really like a lot of camo patterns. I do like the Asio Gear camo pattern. I feel like it would work in a lot of different scenarios, but can you kind of tell the origin story of the inspiration of the pattern? Because there's going to be people that are watching that are going to go check it out, and there's going to be people that are driving to work just listening. So Sure. Can you describe it?
No, absolutely. So, I wanted to bring the premium stuff to the whitetail space. That's really what I wanted to do, but I needed to find a camo pattern. I wasn't going to do digital. I wasn't going to do, just some design, just cockamamie, quote unquote, scientific camo. So I just stayed away from it for like 2 years. And I was walking in the woods to go, this is exactly how it happened. Walking in the woods to pull a stand out in October to move it, October of 2018. And 2 great horned owls, they were breeding or fighting. I don't know what they were doing, but they were above me at 10 o'clock in the morning. And one of them flew into a tree. The other one kind of flew off. And I lost him. He flew into that tree and I lost him. And I walked to him, and you know how they wiggle their heads back and forth, kind of checking you out. And then I saw him again, and then he flew another tree and he disappeared again. And I said, that's the best camouflage from a tree in the woods. And owls are from every part of the whitetail range. And so, the light bulb started going off. I went home, talked with some veterinary friends of mine, and they got in touch with some biologists. And I said, I want to know about rabbit, squirrel, and whitetail eyesight. Are they the same? Are they close to the same? What's the deal? Well, they come back to me, a couple weeks later and say, yeah, they have dichromatic eyesight. Those prey animals see very, very similar, like a tree squirrel and a whitetail have exactly the same eyesight. And a rabbit and a deer have very similar eyesight. So those prey animals. And so I just, I'm a country boy from South Carolina, but I kind of said, all right, an owl is hunting out of a tree, catching an animal that has the exact same eyesight as what I'm trying to hunt as a whitetail hunter. So 1 and 1 equals 2. If I'm going to have a camouflage pattern that's going to try and hide from the eyesight of what I'm trying to hide from, why would I just not take the patterns, shading, depth, the whole pattern of the owl and put it on really high-end apparel? And
but that's too simple. That would never work.
Yeah. It's very, very simple, and I'm simple-minded. But to me, that made a whole lot of sense. And I never will forget, man, when I got that first swatch of fabric. I got like a 4-yard swatch of fabric that was shipped in from the printer. And I went out to like 5 different trees, and I wrapped it around the tree. And I had clothing from every manufacturer, every premium manufacturer, every 800-pound gorilla. And I started comparing ours with theirs. And of course, I have a dog in the fight, but I would challenge anybody to take their camouflage pattern and get in any tree and show me that Osseo does not blend in better. I mean, it is, but it's not us. We stole the camo pattern from nature. It's a natural ambush predator pattern, and it just really works in trees.
Yeah, that's good. It sounds like you need to give 2% to the Great Horned Owl Conservation Act or something.
I'll do that. Yeah. When we get to year 10, I'm going to remember us having this conversation, and I'm going to write you a little note and say, guess what? We just did.
Hey, I'll be expecting it. But no, to kind of wrap this up, what we normally do is we have this little mini series called Close But No Cigar. And we know you have a very impressive resume when it comes to whitetail just by looking at the wall behind you and, all your out of the state hunts. But just to kind of bring people to realize that you're not just a killing machine, you're actually human. And sometimes you do make mistakes. What's that one moment or one encounter or shot opportunity, whatever it may be, that still haunts you to this day when you almost sealed the deal with an animal but came up empty-handed?
Yes, sir. I know exactly which one I'm going to, because we talked about dreaming about deer. Well, the nightmare that I have in the middle of the night, this buck, he was probably 185-inch 9-point.
And
9?
Dear God, that's huge.
Tomorrow, and I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a video clip. We got video footage of him. I had no idea this deer was there. It was Illinois, and we were hunting on a river, and he was, coming down that river with some does. I have no idea where he came from, but I saw him the first afternoon. He came up with a doe and was about 60 yards away with the doe. And of course, I snort, wheezed, and grunted at him, and he kept on going with the doe. And I mean, Kevin, the guy that was filming, we were just blunt. I mean, obviously you're like, oh my gosh, what was he, a 9? Was he a 12? I mean, all you could see was the cage. And they ran down into the river bottom and they were gone. Well, of course, we went right back there the next day. And about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, there's a doe coming up behind us from the river bottom. And she's coming up, and so yearling doe, and he's right behind her. And she's feeding up our way. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to get a shot at him. And here he comes. He's lumbering up right behind her. She does a loop out, can't smell us. The wind's perfect. She loops and comes right through a shooting lane at 20 yards, walks back down to the bottom, and he's browsing on something but watching her. And then all of a sudden he takes the trail, and here he comes. And I'm like, you are dead. I'm about to play world record 9-point.
That's that celebrating we were talking about earlier.
What guys listening won't be able to see this, so I'll try and describe it. But it was behind us, and back then this was probably 14 or 15. Those camera bases you had were giant. I don't know if y'all remember those, but they had giant ratchet straps.
Oh yeah,
big metal blocky things. And I turned around to draw my bow, and the camera base was in the way, and I could not draw my bow. I tried to get on a knee, and then the limbs would hit it. I did everything, and he walked right through the shooting lane at 20, 25 yards, turned his butt to me, and walked straight to her. And, when I got out of range, of course, I grunted at him and all that. And he was probably 6.5. He was a big, mature buck, obviously. And he just kind of looked back, and I never will forget those big, black, dark shark eyes looking back going, I know you're a hunter, and there's no chance I'm coming back. Yeah. And he took the duck. Yeah. That was it. That was the end of that one.
It's painful.
Oh boy. Yeah, it hurts right now. It hurts.
I just can't imagine the frame on that sucker. What'd you say, 187-inch 9 or something like that?
Mid 180, 9-point. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's probably 2 or 3 inches.
Oh man.
He's humongous.
That is awesome. Yeah, that is the deer of nightmares. You were right.
Yeah, that one. To this day, I don't use a whole lot of profanity, but every time I see Kevin and think of that, I have to light into him a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh,
he deserves it.
The wrong way. Yeah, he put his face in the wrong place.
That's awesome. Well, it is. It's getting dangerously close to 9:00 where you are in South Carolina, but we really appreciate you jumping on and talking with us for an hour and a half. But if people want to connect with you, pick up some Osseo gear, check you guys out, where are the best places for them to do that?
Yep. So I'm very, very hands-on with everything I do. And if they want to reach out on Instagram, Joe Miles Hunting at Instagram, they can certainly do that. Joe Miles Hunting on Facebook for our older guys, and then AsioGear.com, that ASIO Gear.com. That's our website. And then we have a contact. We got emails, and my personal email is joe@AsioGear.com. And, any questions, any concerns, I'm happy to help. I'm going to throw a plug out there before we sign off. All of our gear has an unquestioned lifetime warranty. So if 5 years from now you light the jacket on fire because you got too close to your fireplace, it's 100% replaceable. We either fix it or repair it. Lifetime warranty on everything that we have.
Awesome. Well, Joe, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for jumping on.
No, guys, I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
It's been
awesome.
A blast.
Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.